Hi, I'm Jason Sterling. This is From Start to Finish. This is going to be a series of videos following, like I said, from start to finish of the build you see here on your screen now. We're going to go over, instead of doing this as a live stream, basically I just recorded it, pre-recorded it. And we're going to go over a lot of my thoughts of why I'm building it the way I am, sort of my philosophy of building in The Sims, and the inspiration behind some of the building that normally I might touch upon in a live stream. And that's where we're going to start today, really, as inspiration. Now, you can see some of the pictures coming across now. This is some before and after shots of this particular lot, where we started, where we're going to finish. This started as, I guess, a park. I don't really know what you'd call it. It could be a lot meant for maybe the natural living lifestyle. I don't know. It has a pond here, roughly shaped like a heart, and it's got a fishing sign, but then there's no fish. So there was no fish in the pond. I guess it has to be stocked with fish by a sim, right? So there was no fish there. So basically it's an empty lot. Yeah, I mean, there's a tree and an empty pond here, but it's basically an empty lot. So I deleted it, of course, and we're going to build the finished structure you see on the screen right here. Now, this was inspired by two different things, kind of three different things, but definitely two different things. It's a Johnny-come-lately kind of build. I did not intend to build this for this particular area of Everdo. I was watching the television series Foundation. They had it's a science fiction series. You can see some of the pictures here. They're kind of hard to make out, but it had this sort of cylindrical space habitat. If you've seen the movie Elysium, it looks a bit like that, but much larger. So it's got a circular shape, and within that circle there is living space, as in actual habitable Earth type land that you would live up on, and artificial gravity and things like that. Now, we really can't do anything quite like that in The Sims, although I do have a few ideas in that direction, but nothing I wanted to try to tackle right now, because those are like that's a huge project. It's a huge project. That's like, gee, Jason, you have an extra month because of COVID. Why don't you do this type of project? But from there, though, I started to think, hey, there is a smaller version of that, and it's actually in the community that I live in, Oklahoma City. I live in the metropolitan area of Oklahoma City. And downtown in Oklahoma City, there is something we call the Crystal Bridge. And it is a botanical garden in the shape of a cylinder, right? In the shape of a cylinder. Again, you're seeing pictures here of it. Stretches across a little pond and is filled with a variety of plants. So right off the bat, I think, okay, hey, why not do that in a sort of fairy style that matches the other fairy builds I'm doing in Everdo here in The Sims 4. Let's go in, let's build a sort of cylinder. Now, we can do sort of cylinder types of builds within The Sims using the roofing panels. That actually will be in episode 2. Because how I start this build, and we're starting right now, is I started with an entrance to Everdo. Right, hey, maybe Everdo, these are fairies, right? Maybe Everdo is going to have a sort of ferry port, right? Instead of an airport, a sort of ferry port. So I start by building a really high platform. And I think of it at the time as sort of the highest point on the lot, right? The highest point on the lot. It doesn't end up being the highest point on the lot, but I think, hey, the control tower is higher than the airport too. So we'll go with that as kind of the excuse. But it's the highest point on the lot at this point. And it's a landing platform. So when you're a ferry coming from long distances into Everdo, you would land there, come down the steps into the community proper. And that's why I started designing first. You can see it kind of growing as we're talking here. There'll be a lot of sort of speed build included in these sort of discussions so that you can watch the build as it takes place. There are very few ways to create a circular opening within The Sims 4. In fact, there's nothing that you can do within the game alone, even with cheats within the game. However, using the tool mod, we do have a circular archway from Realm of Magic, and it fits with the rest of my builds in Everdo, except for the cottage. The other builds because I leaned heavily into the realm of magic for assets. So what we can do with the tool mod, of course, is take one of the archways, take another archway, flip it upside down, and create a circle. So it creates a circular opening. I had this image of a very long stairway passing through 3 of these openings. So it'd be almost like passing through customs and immigration at an airport. These 3 different kind of checkpoints. Of course, these are magical checkpoints, you guys. These are magical checkpoints, so you can just walk right through, because it'll tell, you know, oh no, this is a ferry. They landed here on the platform. I also considered putting a spawn point on top of the platform so that when you came in from outside the lot, as a sim that you're playing, you would actually spawn on top of the platform. I did not end up doing that. I didn't. I thought maybe everyone might not want to walk down those steps every single time they come onto this lot. Ended up not doing it. Now, I do think at the end of this series of videos, when this is all over, I might tag on something to show how to do that so that you can see. Now, there's another video on my channel somewhere in the depths of time from way back around City Living and the Get Famous sort of expansion packs. I remember specifically using the technique in Get Famous, and I did a video showing how to create those spawn points. So somewhere on the channel it does exist, but it's going to exist again in a second, newer place once this series of videos is closer to the end. I mostly say that now because I haven't done it yet. And so the build is finished, but I do think I'll go in as I'm speaking here. I'm thinking now I should go in and kind of do a little tutorial about that real quick. And if you want to add it to your build in your game, a build you're doing, or if you use this build and you want to add it to this build in your game, you'd be able to do that. It stands I haven't done it just yet, but what I have done, as you can see here, is I was using the terrain tool to map out various levels on this lot. My first idea with this lot was to have this landing pad, a botanical garden in a tube, and then a sort of village spread out of small individual little houses around the bottom. As you can see from the finished picture already, we're not going to end up going in that direction. And I'll talk about that more when we actually come to that during this series of videos, the hows and whys I decided against it, because I do start that coming up in a few videos, but I don't stick with it. But you can see here I am kind of mapping that out. I do use terrain tools to some extent. I hate the way you bounce up and down when you're moving across a lot with terrain tools. A lot of that stuff I end up flattening out and replacing with large chunks of rock. In this case, rock from Cats and Dogs and Snowy Escape, I believe it was called. I always want to say Snowy Living, but Snowy Escape and Cats and Dogs. I grabbed these rocks, these large chunks of rocks, almost like mountains, from the debug section. And you can see it as I'm building here. I think there's a few places where I do kind of illustrate putting in the debug cheat and then finding these rocks and bringing them out. Sometimes I'll shrink them down. Sometimes I'll shrink them down even further using tool mod beyond what we can do in the game. It just depends. But for now, we're using them to build the sides of this sort of mountain, right, on this lot. And the sides create a sort of archway for the stairs to come down through. And the mountainous pieces, I had deliberately sort of intersect the middle archway, the really large archway, almost as though the mountain is still growing, right? So it grows just like the plants, just much slower. And over time, it's kind of grown up a little bit higher, right? And so the idea is eventually it'll reach up and create a full archway. So it's a little bit magical, right? This is a magical lot. These are fairies. So that's kind of the idea there. And then you come in and start throwing in a little bit of wallpaper. I want to look at what it's going to look like tone-wise. So color-wise and tone-wise, what is it going to look like against the backdrop of the rest of the neighborhood? And I want to do that early so that I know that I'm actually headed in the right direction and I don't end up going back and undoing too much work, because I look at it later and think this doesn't fit. This doesn't match where we are. This doesn't match what it looks like. And so you can see this first video today is an hour of build time in game. That's what we're going to end up with, about an hour, maybe a little bit longer of build time in game. So real early on, I start throwing wallpapers on things and say, okay, is this going to match? Is this going to fit the tone? Is this going to look like it belongs? You can also notice I have a really super tall wall placed on the lot. That is only so I can access super tall friezes and doorways and windows to use within the build. That's about the only way you can reach them, although you can use these items using just the move objects on cheat that's already in game, but you can't access the items without a full height wall, without a super height wall, either medium super height or full super height. There's 3 heights to the walls. So without that, you can't reach them at all. If someone were to ask, I would tell them that's one of the big things I'd like to see change. No one's asked. If you're curious, no one has asked. I am in the creator network, and before that, the game changers, nobody's asked. So keep that in mind. No one really was concerned as far as at Maxis or EA. I don't think they're really concerned about it. But anyway, there's a workaround, and it's not too hard. Okay, as you can see here, while I was talking, we did put in a sort of semicircular base for our statue from Batu to rest on. We're also putting on a base here for the Crystal Bridge to rest on coming up pretty quickly here. We'll start working on it. I don't ultimately keep that half circular base for the statue. I end up just turning it into a more natural look. Now, to create this Crystal Bridge effect is actually pretty easy. We've been able to make a sort of circular tube in The Sims for a long time. And with the update that gave us transparent roofing, sort of greenhouse style roofing, that made it possible to make a transparent tube. Up until that point, it had to be solid, of course. Now you can see here, I also put in a platform in the middle to give us some place to put some plantings and some seating later. As far as the tube itself, I put in the initial sort of structure, the base, which is the solid part that you see in the middle. You can click on the shift button and then grab the little arrow, the little sort of triangle on the edge of the roof, and just pull out one side or the other of it. If you grab the triangle and just pull it, it'll take both sides at once. That's part of what you see happening here. I shrink down the base from 3 squares on the grid to just 1. I want to make it as small as possible, and coming up in future episodes, I do my best to actually just erase it completely so that you can't see it. At first, I don't do that. I do have this idea that I'm going to try to adapt it in some way as maybe a sort of room, these wings sticking out from the side. Ultimately, that does not stick. I end up, like I said, in future videos, trying to go ahead and erase it as much as possible. You can see a little bit of that here where I'm kind of playing around with using transparent walls to try to erase some of that in the middle, try to lessen its impact, because we do want it to look as though it's as magical as possible, right? It's just this floating cylinder. The top part is just like the bottom. It's real easy to do. So the bottom, we pushed the roof downward to create a curve like this. On the top, as you saw, we pulled the roof upward to create a curve like this. So, or like this, right? Let me keep it in frame. So it's really not too hard. It's really very, very easy to do. Right now, this tube is completely transparent. And originally, this kind of the idea I had in my head was, hey, we'll do this transparent tube, which at the time I thought would make it look more magical. Right now, or later on as I'm building, and still right now, I think it makes it look a little bit too sci-fi, like, a sort of science fiction look. And I don't want a science fiction look. I want a fantasy look, right? I want to look more like a sort of Victorian fantasy, more maybe like a steampunk sort of fantasy more than science fiction, a true science fiction fantasy. I work in some of these chunks of rock that we have from Snowy Escape. These are from Snowy Escape. First, I put down a floor to flatten out the terrain. Then I place the rocks themselves in place. I shrink them down, of course, so that they are more in tune with the size of the lot and the size of the build. I want the tube to appear to be cantilevered outward from these rocks, as though this is a sort of rock outcropping. Once they're in place, I erase the flooring underneath, and that allows the terrain to rebound, so it pops back up. That allows the stones to appear to be more built into the terrain instead of floating on top of it. You know, we get more of that look of the grass and the land around it it's actually sitting in the ground. So that's how you do that. I do that with landscaping a lot too. You're going to see that as we do landscaping. But I do that with landscaping a lot. Flatten out the terrain, put the landscaping in place, erase the flooring. The terrain rebounds around the landscaping, and it looks more like the landscaping is actually growing out of the ground instead of, a lot of times, you know, it looks like it's kind of floating. You know, with the terrain, the way the terrain's designed, our landscape plants don't actually sink into the ground, and so they're planted, they look like they're floating. You can see there I did expand the structural support for the roof, made it double wide. That was where I was first kind of playing around with this idea that, hey, I might do a sort of room, sort of wings coming out from each side. That's how that started. I go back, I put in a Victorian style sort of cast iron frame to our tube, and I change the coloring to look a little more rusty, a little more sort of bronzy, again, to bring in a little bit of that steampunk, you know, a little bit of that steampunk feel more than hard sci-fi. And I like it a lot better. I do. First of all, it fits with a lot of the other builds that I've done for Everdo. And I do want a little bit of a cohesive look through Everdo, especially here in the back. Now, the treehouse I did as a cottage, and I'm going to leave that alone. But for these structures here in the back, I want a little bit more of a cohesive feel. And that will tie into that. That will help tie into those other structures. We're going to do some terrain work. As you can see, we're going to kind of carve out a little bit of a space there around that structural support, which inevitably will be removed. We'll remove that support underneath our crystal bridge, and we'll put a pond there where I've kind of already started to carve in that sort of circular shape, right, for our pond. I already took out the half circle platform there on top. So pretty quickly, I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't working. Pretty quickly, I don't want this. Everything that you see here took just about a little bit over an hour to do. This was pretty quick. Overall, I think the build, I don't know how many hours it took. I'm about to give a figure here. It has no basis in reality. It took at least 12 hours, probably longer, of overall time. I'm sure it's more than that. I may try to count it up and see. It's a lot. It's a lot. I think I have 12 hours of video recording, maybe more than that. But that doesn't include some of the stuff that I kind of went in and play tested off video. It does not include all the play testing I'll do at the end when I'll bring an actual family in to make sure that it works. So, you know, I don't know how much time exactly it took, but at least 12 hours. That was an hour that we spent right there. And we're going to spend a lot more time, so please hit like, subscribe, and notify so that you won't miss this. This is going to be a host series. Right now, I think I've got at least 5 parts edited. There's more than 5. So maybe, I don't know how many parts they'll come up with, but they're pretty short. Like this one's about 20 minutes, and they're all about 20 minutes. They may even edit down smaller when I get in to edit them. That's where they stand right now. When I'm doing voiceover, sometimes I do edit it down even smaller. I don't need as much as what I thought I did. So we'll see what we end up with, but there are definitely future parts coming to this. Start to finish, you guys, start to finish. Be a lot more discussion about what I think about when I'm building and how I make changes when I'm building and why I make those changes. Because a lot of times if I'm doing a build tour or even in the days when I would do speed tours, all you really saw was that finished product. You know, you didn't see all of the work and all the changes and all the ideas and all of the inspirations that come and go even just while you're building to create a structure, to create a lot. So please hit like, subscribe, and notify. And until next time, thanks for watching.